Somewhere in Siberia, in a cave carved into a mountain range that hasn't changed much in 100,000 years, a girl died, 13 years old. Nobody buried her with ceremony. Nobody wrote down her name. For 90,000 years, she was just a splinter of bone. 2 centimeters, no bigger than your fingernail. Sitting in the dark, waiting. When she finally surfaced in the hands of scientists who almost threw her away as unidentifiable, she told them something that shouldn't have been possible. Her mother wasn't like her father. Not different tribe, not different village. Different species of human entirely. Two kinds of people who were never supposed to cross paths, who lived in different worlds, walked differently, maybe even looked at each other as something closer to strangers than kin, found each other anyway. And whatever happened between them made her. If that sounds impossible, that's because for a long time we assumed it was. We assumed ancient humans mated the way we picture cavemen mating, grunting, grabbing, dragging someone back to a cave by the hair. Random. Violent. Whoever's strongest wins. But that girl in Siberia is proof of something else. Something stranger, and honestly, something far more human. Because before she could exist, an entire species had to give something up. A weapon. One that every one of our closest animal relatives still carries in their mouths to this day. This is the story of how we lost it, and what we built instead. Picture a troop of chimpanzees in the forest. A female comes into heat and her body practically announces it. Bright, swollen, unmistakable. Every male within sight knows exactly what that means, and exactly what's at stake. So they fight for her. Teeth bared, long, curved, built for cutting, because in that world, teeth decide who gets to be a father. That was us too, once. 7 million years ago, whatever creature we shared with chimpanzees almost certainly played by the same brutal rules. Strength wins, size wins. Whoever draws first blood gets the girl. So here's the question worth sitting with. If that's where we came from, if violence used to be the whole mating strategy, how did we end up here instead? How did we end up with people who choose each other? Who stay? Who raise children side by side for years, sometimes for life? Something had to break that old system completely, and the clue is sitting in a jaw, over 4 million years old, that never should have looked the way it looks. Picture the earliest ancestor we can call human, in any sense. Small, upright, living in a landscape somewhere between forest and open ground. If you'd pulled back its lips, you would not have found the daggers you'd expect. The blade was already gone. Blunted. Disarmed. This wasn't supposed to happen yet. This creature didn't have fire, didn't have spears, didn't have anything close to what we'd call technology, and yet somehow its most basic weapon for winning a mate through violence had already vanished. Something, long before tools, long before big brains, was punishing aggression instead of rewarding it. Think about what that actually means for a second. In a world with no weapons and no fangs, the biggest, angriest male in the group couldn't just fight his way to every female anymore. The old strategy stopped paying off. And when the old strategy stops paying off, something has to replace it. That replacement is the real beginning of this story. But before we get there, there's a second mystery hiding underneath the first one. Because losing the weapon only solves half the problem. The other half is even stranger. Here's the thing about that swollen, unmistakable signal chimpanzees use, the one that broadcasts she's fertile right now to everyone watching. It's not just about attraction. It's information. It tells every competing male exactly when the window is open and exactly when to fight for it. Now imagine that signal just disappears. No swelling, no obvious sign, no schedule posted for the group to read. A woman's most fertile days become completely invisible. To the men around her, and functionally, to everyone. Stop and think about how strange that actually is. Almost nowhere else in nature does a species evolve to hide the exact information a male would need to guarantee he's the father. It's the opposite of what you'd expect evolution to do. But hiding that signal broke something important. Picture a male running the old strategy, the one built entirely around timing. Show up for the fertile window. Guard her fiercely for those few critical days. Relax once it passes, move on, repeat with someone else next cycle. Take away the visible signal, and that entire strategy collapses. He can't see the window anymore. He doesn't know which day matters. A 2-day stakeout isn't an option when you don't know which 2 days to stake out. So what's left if you're a male who actually wants a chance at fatherhood? You stop gambling on timing. You start staying. All the time. Not because you know today's the day, but because you don't, and the only real insurance left is being there constantly. Bringing food, showing up, making yourself worth keeping around. And here's the part that changes everything. The moment nobody could reliably track fertility from the outside anymore, nobody could fully control it from the outside either. For the first time, a woman held something no ancestor of hers had ever really held: the quiet power to simply prefer someone, to notice who kept showing up, who shared what he found, who treated her and eventually her children well, and to lean toward him without the entire group turning it into a violent contest over her body the way it might have once. One sex lost the ability to force the outcome through violence. The other quietly gained the ability to shape it through choice. Put those two changes side by side, and you're not looking at competition anymore. You're looking at the rough outline of something closer to a relationship. But relationships don't survive on good intentions. They survive because something forces two people to actually need each other. And the thing that forced it, the thing that turned staying close into staying close or your child dies, was about to get a lot more serious. Watch a baby chimpanzee for 5 minutes, and you'll see something a human parent can only dream about. Within months, it can grip its mother's fur and hold on. It moves. It adapts fast. It's built, almost from birth, to start becoming independent. A human baby can't even hold up its own head. Somewhere in our story, brains started getting bigger, dramatically bigger, and that single change collided head-on with something else that had already happened: walking upright on two legs, which requires a narrower hip and a narrower birth canal. Picture the impossible math. A body built for efficient upright walking needs a narrow passageway. A brain that's rapidly getting bigger needs a wide one. Those two demands were pulling in opposite directions on the same body at the same time, and something had to give. The compromise evolution landed on was almost unthinkable. Kick the baby out early. Deliver it before its brain finishes the growth that, in almost every other primate, happens quietly and safely inside the womb. The result is a baby that arrives helpless in a way no other primate on Earth experiences. Can't walk, can't feed itself, can't survive more than a few hours without someone holding, carrying, and constantly protecting it. Now put yourself in the position of the mother carrying that baby. Every single day, she needs enough food to fuel herself and a completely dependent infant who contributes nothing back. Not for months, not for years. And she's trying to do this in open, exposed country, with predators watching, with food scattered unpredictably across the landscape. This is the second crisis in our story, and it's the far more dangerous one. The first crisis, losing the ability to fight for a mate, was about competition. This one is about whether the species survives at all, because a mother who can't feed both herself and her child doesn't just struggle. She fails, and the child fails with her. So a different kind of pressure kicks in, not on any one person, but on the whole group surrounding her. A partner who stays and provides, the direct payoff of everything that happened back in level 2, becomes part of the answer. But it's not the whole answer, because one partner still isn't enough to guarantee a helpless infant survives a hostile world for years on end. It takes more hands. Grandmothers, done raising children of their own, stepping back in to help raise the next generation. Older siblings, other adults in the group who aren't the biological parents at all, but who show up anyway. Raising a child stops being one person's job. It stops even being two people's job. It becomes something the entire group quietly signs up for, because the alternative is watching children die. And here's where the story gets genuinely strange, because you'd expect all of this extra care, all this cooperative protection, to produce children who take their time growing up, safe and slow, inside a group built specifically to protect them. It did the opposite. There's a skeleton discovered on the shore of an African lake that still unsettles anyone who studies it closely. A boy, nearly 5'3", built like someone on the edge of adulthood, someone you'd guess was 14, 15 years old just by looking at him. He was 8 or 9. His body belonged to a species that walked this earth for close to 2 million years. longer than we've existed, and his bones, read closely, told scientists something they weren't expecting. He wasn't growing up like a modern child at all. He was growing up on fast forward. There was no long, sheltered stretch of adolescence, no decade of protected childhood. His body was racing toward adulthood at a pace that would look almost alarming in a child today. And he wasn't unusual. That same pattern shows up again and again across the ancient human story. A young girl, the very girl from Siberia we opened with, was already at the edge of adulthood by 13. Even chimpanzees, in comparison, take a little longer to get there. We're the strange ones, in this picture. Modern humans stretch childhood out further than almost any hominin before us. Years and years of protected dependency before anyone expects us to be ready for adulthood. So here's the contradiction worth sitting with. We just spent an entire chapter establishing that ancient infants were the neediest, most helpless infants in the animal kingdom. So why would the rest of childhood speed up instead of slowing down to match? The world they were growing up in gives you the answer, even without a perfect explanation for the mechanism. Life was short, dangerous. Every extra year spent as a dependent child who couldn't yet contribute, couldn't yet reproduce, was a year that might simply never pay off because you might not live to see it. Which means these people were running two clocks that never quite matched. Infancy. Slow, fragile. Needier than anything that came before it. Everything after infancy. Fast. Urgent. Racing toward the moment you'd be old enough to find a partner and start the cycle again. And that acceleration is about to collide with a problem that has nothing to do with biology at all. A problem of simple, brutal arithmetic. Here's the wall every ancient group eventually ran into. Their numbers were tiny. Not tiny like a small town, tiny like 10 people, maybe 20 on a good day, occasionally reaching 30. And that number includes everyone, children, elders, the whole group, not just the adults old enough to start a family. Picture what that actually leaves you with. Strip out the kids, the elders, your own close relatives, and the pool of realistic partners left standing in your own group is painfully small. Maybe a handful of people, maybe fewer. Stay inside that pool, generation after generation, and you're not building a future. You're building a dead end. Weaker children, smaller families, a slow collapse nobody would have understood as it was happening to them. So something had to break the pattern, and two completely different clues found decades apart in completely different parts of the world point to the exact same answer. The first clue is hiding inside teeth. Ancient teeth quietly record something about the specific ground a person grew up walking on. A kind of chemical fingerprint locked in during childhood that never changes, no matter where that person travels afterward. Compare the male teeth from an ancient site to the female teeth from that same site, and a pattern jumps out. The men's teeth match the ground beneath their feet. They grew up right there, in that exact place. The women's teeth, more often than not, tell a different story. They came from somewhere else. The men had stayed home, the women had traveled, crossed unfamiliar territory, entered a group of strangers, and started families there instead. The second clue is more recent, and it's honestly the more haunting one. In a pair of caves in Siberia, scientists managed to reconstruct something that had never been done before. An actual family tree, built entirely from fragments of ancient bone. A father, his teenage daughter, a young boy, an older woman who looks like she might be a grandmother or an aunt. 13 people, all connected, all living in the same place at the same time. And buried inside their genes was the exact same signature the teeth had already hinted at, just written in an entirely different language. The story passed down through mothers was rich with variety, far more than a tiny isolated group should have. But the story passed down father to son, generation after generation, barely changed at all. There's only one explanation that fits both of those facts at once. The men were staying, rooted in the same community, generation after generation. And the women were the ones moving, leaving behind everything familiar, crossing into unknown territory, choosing partners among strangers, and building an entirely new life there. This wasn't chaos. This wasn't wandering. It was close to a rule, and it shows up in fossils and in DNA, separated by nearly 3 million years, telling the same quiet story twice. Which leads to an uncomfortable, irresistible question. If these groups were already crossing unfamiliar territory just to find partners within their own kind, how far did that crossing sometimes go? What happened when the stranger on the other side wasn't just from a different band, but from an entirely different branch of the human family altogether? That answer brings us back to where we started. Go back to that cave. That 2 centimeter splinter of bone, sitting unidentified for so long that it almost got dismissed entirely. When scientists finally coaxed her secret out of it, what came back should have been a mess. Too small a sample, too old, too degraded to say anything clean. Instead, it was almost unbearably clear. A girl, 13 years old, maybe a little older, right at the edge of what counted as adulthood in her world. She died roughly 90,000 years ago and never grew any older than that. Her story was split exactly down the middle. Half of her came from her mother, and her mother belonged to one distinct kind of ancient human. The other half came from her father, and he belonged to another. Two separate branches of humanity, evolving apart for hundreds of thousands of years, in different corners of an unforgiving world. They found her, this proof, sitting quietly in her own bones, that on some day, in some valley, two people from two different worlds looked at each other and didn't see a stranger to fear. They saw someone worth staying with. And she wasn't a one-time accident. Buried even deeper in her father's own story was an echo of an earlier crossing. Generations before she was ever born, another pair from different worlds had found each other too. This had happened before. Quietly, repeatedly, across tens of thousands of years in a part of the world we picture as nothing but frozen, empty isolation. She's not even the only proof. Thousands of miles away and tens of thousands of years later, in a cave in Romania, scientists found a young man whose own body carried an unmistakable trace. A huge, unbroken portion of his ancestry belonging to that other kind of human. Not a faint echo passed down over hundreds of generations, the way it exists in most of us today. A recent, undeniable inheritance. A great-great-grandparent, maybe even closer, who wasn't the same kind of human he was. Two proofs, two different corners of the ancient world, both saying the exact same thing. These crossings weren't rare accidents lost to time. They happened again and again wherever two different worlds of humanity happened to meet. And there's one more twist buried in this story. A quiet, haunting one. Look inside anyone alive today, anywhere in the world, and you'll likely find fragments of that other kind of human still woven through their DNA. But you will never find one specific piece, not once, not anywhere. Something about the sons born from those crossings didn't carry forward the way the daughters did. Nobody knows exactly why. It's the one part of this story that still refuses to fully explain itself. Proof that it happened. Sitting right alongside proof that we still don't understand everything it cost. What we do understand now, looking back across all of it, is something that completely rewrites the picture most of us grew up believing. For most of the last century, we told ourselves a simple story about how this all began. The caveman, club in hand. Dragging someone back to a cave by force, because that's just how it worked back then. Walk back through everything you've just heard, and that story doesn't just feel outdated. It feels almost backwards. The weapon built for exactly that kind of forced dominance, those long, blade-like teeth, was already gone from our ancestors' mouths over 4 million years ago, long before they had anything else to replace it with. The invisible signal that should have stripped women of any say in the matter did the opposite. It's the very thing that seems to have cracked open a door for choice in the first place. And far from mating however they pleased, without rule or pattern, the deepest evidence we have shows something almost the opposite. Careful, structured movement. Women deliberately leaving everything familiar behind, again and again, to build lives among strangers. Even the idea that ancient humans were locked forever to one partner for life doesn't hold up cleanly under all this. The real picture looks more flexible than that. Bonds that lasted long enough to see a child through its most dangerous years. Sometimes far longer, sometimes shorter. Shaped entirely by what the world around them demanded. Not chaos, not a fairy tale. Something in between, and something remarkably adaptable. Nobody claims to have the single, final answer for exactly why all of this happened the way it did. Maybe it was about a mate worth keeping close. Maybe it was about protecting a child from threats hiding inside the group itself. Maybe it was simply about survival, about needing enough hands, related or not, willing to help a helpless infant make it to adulthood. Maybe, sometimes, it was about proving your worth to an entire community watching you do something hard. No single thread explains all of it alone. But maybe that's the most honest place to land, because the truth was never one clean idea. It was all of it, stacked on top of each other, over millions of years. A weapon given up, a signal hidden, an infant too fragile to survive alone, a childhood raced through too fast, women who crossed unfamiliar ground to build new lives, and every so often, two entirely different worlds of humanity finding a way to become one. So picture her one more time. A 13-year-old girl, half of one world, half of another, who lived and died in a Siberian cave 90,000 years ago, never knowing that one day something impossibly small she left behind would tell her whole story to people who wouldn't exist for another 90,000 years. She wasn't proof of a violent, chaotic world stumbling into existence by accident. She was proof of everything that came before her, a slow, patient, quietly built system, based not on force but on staying, choosing, and crossing whatever distance it took to find someone worth building a life with. That system built her, and it built every single person listening to this right now.